Welcome to Twists of Life, where every story has an unexpected turn. Stories of joy and sorrow, hope and redemption, just like the life we all live. Make yourself comfortable. It's time to begin. Eleanor Vance stepped cautiously, carefully choosing where to place her foot. The last thing she needed, on top of all her troubles, was to slip on this slush and injure herself. She was in and out of hospitals enough as it was. What could she do? Age was taking its toll, and the diagnosis didn't sound promising. They stood for a moment, exchanging a few words. The former teacher was always pleased to hear about her students' successes. There was Lydia, for instance, studying finance and economics, and managing to work part-time too. What a clever girl, a real go-getter. They parted ways. Lydia hurried off to her business, and Eleanor Vance headed towards the shop. They were out of potatoes, and fresh bread wouldn't hurt either. She'd just get a little of everything. How much did she, a solitary woman, need? Before Eleanor Vance, like all her colleagues and friends, was constantly on diets. But now she could afford an extra bun or a sweet. Only, the pleasure of eating had somehow vanished. And in general, the very flow of life had changed. Headaches became her constant companions almost immediately after retiring. The whole staff saw her off, with a generously laid table in the school canteen. Words of gratitude were spoken in Eleanor Vance's honor. Each colleague recalled something good. It was a little awkward, but deeply touching, almost to tears. At the time of her retirement, Eleanor Vance was only 60. It was frightening to break away from her usual social circle, to leave the school where she had taught history for almost 40 years. But what else could she do? The children were becoming more and more difficult, and finding an approach to them was getting harder every year. In short, Eleanor Vance didn't wait to be asked. When she felt things were heading that way, she wrote her resignation herself. The newly minted pensioner took a long time to get used to the new routine. At first, she would wake up at 7 in the morning and automatically get ready for work. Only then would she remember there was nowhere for her to go. She'd lie down again, but sleep wouldn't come. Then Eleanor Vance would stand by the window and watch the passers-by. Adults hurried to work, children ran to school, and she felt as if she had fallen out of this bustling life, found herself somewhere on its periphery. "Don't talk nonsense," her old friend Carol would say in response to her confessions. "Life only begins in retirement. Enjoy your well-deserved rest." Carol herself had retired a couple of years earlier, but she couldn't understand Eleanor Vance. After all, Carol had a husband, grown-up children, and most importantly, grandchildren, 5-year-old twins, Sam and Daisy. Their parents worked, and the grandparents helped raise the little ones. So Carol had a full life, someone to care for. How could she understand Eleanor Vance? But things just hadn't worked out for her own family. No matter how much the woman was treated, what doctors she consulted, her husband George had the means to arrange consultations with any medical luminary. After all, he was the chief physician at the local regional hospital, so he had the necessary connections. But nothing helped. The woman remained childless. Both Eleanor Vance herself and her husband. How many children in the world were unwanted by their own parents? Eleanor Vance had seen plenty of such cases during her years at school. And seemingly the family was prosperous, the child dressed and shod like a doll. But you could still see those who lacked parental care and attention. Eleanor Vance and her husband would have been happy to raise Daniel, to make him happy, to show him the world, to raise a kind, good person. But the stork never came to their house. Eleanor Vance took a long time to come to terms with the idea that she wouldn't become a mother. She didn't give up immediately. She fought to the end, until her health began to fail. It was then, at the first warning signs, her friend Carol, she would have had a full set even at 100, but she didn't fully appreciate her happiness, as often happens with happy people. She took the gift from heaven for granted, and even complained to Eleanor Vance periodically, sometimes about her lazy son, sometimes about her fashion-conscious daughter, and to friends with children. If they wanted, they went on a trip. If they wanted, they lay around all day watching TV after a hard work week. No homework, no children's clinics, no endless clubs and sections. And still, Eleanor Vance suffered. She longed to give love and affection to a close person who needed her, and she was afraid of a lonely old age, because it would come someday, and there would be no one to even bring her a glass of water. And then somehow the realization came that everyone has their own destiny. Eleanor Vance had this one. Not the worst, honestly. She had a loving husband, financial security, a beloved job, and it was to her job that the woman gave her heart and soul. There were always enough children at school who needed her help. Seeing such children, she tried to notice their problems, to support them in difficult situations. Some had no one else to rely on in this life but her, and they were so vulnerable, so defenseless. The stories of her students still surfaced in Eleanor Vance's memory in minute detail. Take Leo Miller, for example. Everyone had written him off. The principal himself predicted the boy would end up in prison in the near future. Teachers refused to conduct lessons if the boy was in the classroom. Leo was bullied from all sides, and all he needed was a heart-to-heart talk with someone who would understand him, pity him. Eleanor Vance turned out to be that person. Leo had problems at home. His father drank, lashed out at the children, beat his wife. Eleanor Vance understood that Leo Miller would perish in such a family. She used all her connections and arranged for the difficult but very intelligent boy to attend a cadet school. Boarding school, strict discipline. All this did its job. Now Leo, who was considered a future criminal at school, holds a leadership position in the police, is married, happy, and quite prosperous. And he still doesn't forget to call his favorite teacher, visits her, and thanks her again for playing such an important role in his destiny. Or Anna Davies, a quiet, timid girl who couldn't open her mouth at the blackboard. She got weeksies. They were given for quiet, trouble-free behavior. Anna had a degree of cerebral palsy, so the girl stood out from her peers, walked a little awkwardly, and her legs periodically cramped. Eleanor Vance felt sorry for Anna and started paying attention to her, and somehow they got talking. It turned out Anna was a person of profound understanding beyond her years, a little sage. Anna entrusted Eleanor Vance with her secret. It turned out the girl secretly wrote poetry, but showed it to no one, feeling shy. Eleanor Vance helped Anna believe in herself and also introduced her to local poets. They appreciated the girl's talent from a professional point of view, took her under their wing and patronage. Now Anna is the author of several books and the head of a literary club at a local university. She found herself and no longer seemed like that quiet and timid girl she used to be. Anna is a real star. There were such happy stories in Eleanor Vance's life. It wasn't always possible to help a child. Take Kathy, for example. Kathy Foster. A thin, tall girl with long hair the color of ripe rye. A real Russian beauty. Fair skin, bottomless blue eyes, regular, pleasant features. Kathy? This girl had serious problems at home. Kathy's father either died or ran away many years ago. The girl didn't even remember him. Since then, her mother dreamed of sorting out her personal life. She was a young, very striking woman who changed boyfriends like gloves, and it would have been fine if she just changed them. She followed them all over the country and, of course, dragged her child along. Kathy came to Eleanor Vance's school in the 8th grade. She never stayed longer than a year and a half, all because of her mother's craving for adventures. Kathy's mother worked as a hairdresser, a profession where it's easy to find a job in any city. Or you could work unofficially from home, which the woman often did. Kathy had to move to this city because of her mother's new suitor, another stepfather. He was a long-distance truck driver, met Kathy's mother by chance in a bar. Well, and took her to his place. Eleanor Vance immediately noticed that Kathy was having a hard time at home. She had a keen eye. She had seen such children, sensed their trouble. The teacher began to watch the girl more closely. Kathy kept to herself. No one bullied or teased her, but she didn't socialize with anyone either. She avoided talking to the girls, tried not to participate in school-wide events. The girl stayed late at school. She would sit in the library, reading something, doing homework, clearly delaying the moment of returning home. One day Eleanor Vance stayed late at school. A parent-teacher meeting unexpectedly dragged on. When everyone left, it was already dark. Eleanor Vance noticed a lonely, hunched figure on a bench in the schoolyard. The sensitive woman immediately understood. This person was clearly in trouble. She approached closer, looked carefully. Kathy was sitting on the bench in the school garden. Seeing Eleanor Vance, she was at first flustered, embarrassed. The teacher managed to get her to talk. She understood what the girl wanted to hear and feel. She saw. She needed the involvement and sympathy of an adult, strong person. At first, Kathy spoke little. She was shy. But then she slowly opened up, told Eleanor Vance about her life. The teacher, who had seen a lot, learned something terrible. The mother had more than once blamed her daughter for her failures in her personal life, because supposedly it was hard to find a good man with a child. And Kathy's mother's men were varied. Some were indifferent, who didn't notice the girl at all. Some were aggressive, irritable. The current stepfather constantly picked on Kathy. Everything she did, in his opinion, was wrong. He also yelled at her mother, sometimes even hit her, especially when he was drinking. Eleanor Vance found out a terrible thing. Kathy, she didn't want to go home. That's why she constantly stayed late in the library, and when it was warm, she would wander the streets until night or sit somewhere until the very last minute, and then return to the apartment. There was nowhere else to go. With an aggressive man and a constantly irritated mother, Kathy felt that she was unwanted by anyone in her family, that she only got in everyone's way, that everyone would be much better off without her. The girl poured out her soul to the teacher, and tears streamed down her cheeks. Eleanor Vance hugged Kathy, said something soothing, and felt angry. Angry at Kathy's mother. This woman didn't appreciate the gift fate had given her at all. Such a wonderful girl. Beautiful, sensitive, capable. She didn't study very well, it's true. But it's no wonder. When would she have time for homework if she tried to get home by the time everyone was asleep, so as not to bother them? That's what she learned from her mother, how not to provoke rudeness or even punishment. And she became even more attentive to Kathy. A warm, trusting relationship developed between them. Sometimes the girl would now go home to the teacher after school. It was quiet and peaceful there. She could prepare for lessons. Kathy even improved her studies. George, Eleanor Vance's husband, was shocked. He initiated a check by the guardianship authorities. He thought maybe at least this authority would hold the irresponsible adults accountable, force them to start taking care of the child. But the results of the check showed that the family was quite prosperous. The apartment was renovated. The child had a separate bed. The refrigerator was full of food. Eleanor Vance was choked by this lie, by the departure from the very sad reality. But what could it have been? Kathy didn't write poetry. She couldn't sing. She didn't want to dance. Handicrafts didn't appeal to her. Eleanor Vance couldn't find what would help Kathy stand strong. The girl needed strength to grow into a normal person, to become strong, independent, self-sufficient. Kathy transformed from an awkward girl into an attractive young woman. She still didn't have friends among her classmates, but she started socializing with girls and boys from a college located near the school. Eleanor Vance kept a close eye on her student. She feared that life circumstances would force her onto a slippery slope. The woman talked to the girl a lot, told her about the various dangers that teenagers face today. In essence, she was doing her mother's important work. Kathy, she would nod, promise not to do anything foolish, and thank Eleanor Vance every time for her involvement. "You do more for me than Mom," Kathy would sometimes say. "Nonsense," Eleanor Vance would object. "Mom feeds you, clothes you, and you warm my heart." Eleanor Vance saw that Kathy was drawn to her, that the girl listened to her opinion, and yet she worried about her greatly. You never know. Kathy was at such a difficult and dangerous age, and the only significant adult in her life was her history teacher. It shouldn't be like that. And then Kathy disappeared. The evening before, she had visited Eleanor Vance. The teacher was happy to see her, invited her to the table. The girl had dinner with Eleanor. They talked a lot that evening, laughed. Nothing foretold trouble. And only just before leaving, Kathy suddenly handed Eleanor Vance a locket. Inexpensive, but pretty. Costume jewelry locket, silver-plated. "This is for you. Thank you very much. It's a lovely thing. But it's not a holiday, is it? Just take it anyway." "Thank you, Kathy." Kathy left, and only then did Eleanor Vance realize the locket opened. Inside was Kathy's photograph. It was clear the picture had been taken recently. The girl smiled cheerfully into the camera and looked like a fashion model. A beauty. Eleanor Vance was happy with the gift. She perceived it as a sign of attention, of care. A teacher, a sensitive, delicate girl. A grateful teenager was a rarity these days. And yet, the gesture immediately struck Eleanor Vance as strange, even unsettling. And the next day, Kathy was gone. She didn't show up at school, nor was she at home. Her mother? Late at night. But this time, it was clear something extraordinary had happened. Kathy, being a minor, was immediately searched for. It was no joke. A 16-year-old teenager had disappeared. Posters were even put up around the city. There were many theories about the girl's fate. Some said she had become the victim of some transient criminal. But Eleanor Vance was certain. Kathy had simply run away. Perhaps not even alone. The girl had known the evening before that she would leave. And that locket with the photo, it was her farewell gift. Eleanor Vance told the investigator about this detail, but he didn't take her words into account, just brushed them aside. The leading theory at the time was kidnapping. Kathy was never found. Her mother, after about, met a new boyfriend and drove off with him into unknown distances. She, like Eleanor Vance, was sure. Her daughter was alive. She had just run away somewhere because she didn't want to study and was forced to at home. She found a boyfriend and was now enjoying life, youth, and freedom. Eleanor Vance never heard from her student again, although she tried several times to find out her fate. As a memento of the girl, she kept that same locket. It was now stored in her jewelry box. Sometimes Eleanor Vance would take it out, open it, and gaze at Kathy's cheerful, beautiful face. Where was this girl now, who was no longer a girl at all, but a grown woman? How had her life turned out? For some reason, it seemed that such a story could not possibly end well. Eleanor Vance blamed herself. She blamed herself for not stopping Kathy that evening, for not asking her more about her plans. After all, the unexpected gift had put her on edge. But the girl, she had looked quite happy then. Yes, exactly happy. It was strange, but reassuring. Eleanor Vance thought that perhaps the girl's life had finally improved, because there was a joyful light shining in her eyes. And look how it all turned out. "You can't save everyone," George would soothe his wife. He saw how she tormented herself with guilt. "I know for sure, things like this happen in the hospital all the time. Trouble? It just happens. Even if you did everything to prevent it, there's nothing you can do about it." Eleanor Vance understood. Her husband was right. But she still tormented herself with thoughts of Kathy. The worst thing was the uncertainty. She so wanted to believe that things had worked out well for that girl. But that was self-deception. What good could happen to a runaway teenager, unwanted by her parents? George, her beloved husband, best friend, closest person, so smart and serious, so strict and responsible at work, so tender and kind with her, with Eleanor Vance. They had been together since they were 20. They met at an amusement park, as students, and they hadn't been apart since, until death separated them 7 years ago. George held a leadership position, chief physician of the regional hospital. It was a stressful, responsible job. He was loved and respected for his professionalism. George loved his work, and Eleanor Vance understood him in this, feeling the same way about her own profession. And so George passed away right at his workplace from a sudden heart attack. So many doctors were nearby, and they couldn't save him. "Trouble just happens," George had said once. And so it happened. Trouble. Eleanor Vance fell into apathy. Perhaps only work pulled her out of it then. At school, whether you wanted to or not, you had to keep going. Students and colleagues distracted Eleanor Vance, gradually bringing her back to life. And then retirement. And Eleanor Vance felt completely alone and unwanted. She hadn't imagined this time like this. They would travel. They had the money for it. Eleanor Vance's husband had been serious and responsible and had opened a savings account long ago. Money was accumulating there for their happy old age. Only Eleanor Vance's old age turned out not to be so happy after all. 2 years after retirement passed in a mode of adapting to a new life. No notebooks, no school bells, no answers, no meetings in the principal's office, no New Year's parties and cheerful school holidays. Eleanor Vance thought about getting a dacha, doing some gardening, but she realized in time that she wouldn't be able to manage a plot alone. If George were here, that would be different. But the woman set up a real greenhouse in her living room. Flowers were everywhere now, not just on the windowsill. Eleanor Vance's personal home garden. She even had 2 small birch trees in tubs. The woman enjoyed caring for the plants. Like children, they also needed care, attention, and love. Eleanor Vance stopped to catch her breath. These walks were already difficult for her. The insidious disease was making itself known. And what would happen next? The doctors had made it clear. There were no miracles. Eleanor Vance's condition would only worsen. How difficult it was at such a moment not to have family and loved ones nearby. Eleanor Vance's head had sometimes ached before, so at first she didn't pay attention to the alarming symptoms. Her head would hurt, she'd take a pill, and everything would be fine again. Then dizziness and nausea were added, and the migraines were making themselves known every day now, so the elderly woman went to the hospital. She was prescribed all the necessary procedures, tests, ultrasound, MRI. The verdict of the attending physician sounded like a bolt from the blue. Inoperable tumor, rapidly progressing. Nothing could be done. The only thing the doctors could do was manage the pain. "How much time do I have?" the woman asked, looking the doctor directly in the eyes. "Tell me honestly and frankly. I have no one. I need to somehow finish all my affairs myself, you understand? I need to know how much time I have." "Well, it's hard to say. It depends on how the disease progresses. I think at least a year. Maximum, well, in your case, no more than 2 years. A year? Just 2 summers? 2 New Years? 2 birthdays? At best. Only then did Eleanor Vance realize how much she, it turned out, loved her life. Even this one. Childless. Lonely. She became frightened. Truly frightened. At first, she even had trouble falling asleep. She just thought and thought about the approaching end. And so, a year passed. The last months of Eleanor Vance's time on this earth were flowing by. The woman had gotten used to the idea. It no longer scared her so much. Eleanor Vance knew, when things got really bad, she would go to a hospice, under the care of doctors. They would take care of her there. She just wished that moment would come as late as possible. Because Eleanor Vance had her plants. Who would take care of them in her absence? And besides, lately the woman had especially appreciated life. She admired the white clouds, rejoiced in the warm sunshine. Even in these gray, leaden clouds that now covered the sky, she saw some special beauty, restrained and cold. Eleanor Vance caught her breath and walked on. Her path led to the shop. She had specifically chosen a supermarket further from home. To get there, she had to walk through the park. The weather, of course, wasn't conducive to walks, and it was already difficult for Eleanor Vance to move around. But without this physical activity, her body might give up sooner than possible. Doctors recommended daily walks to Eleanor Vance, so she walked. Eleanor Vance chose this time, rush hour. People returning from work walked briskly around her. Some still had to run into the shop, some to the kindergarten for their child. They all seemed to live in a different time, rushing, bustling. Eleanor Vance, however, could afford to walk at a leisurely pace and admire the surrounding scenery. And yet, she too had once rushed, run, hurried, just like all these young people. And suddenly Eleanor Vance's attention was drawn to a hunched figure on a park bench. The sensitive woman immediately understood. This person was clearly in trouble. She approached closer, looked carefully. A very young woman was sitting on the bench, dark-skinned, black-eyed. Her clothes were old, cheap. In her arms, she held a bundle. Babies like that are usually discharged from the maternity hospital. She was rocking the bundle and crying. Yes, crying. Real tears streamed down her cheeks. No one noticed those tears. People hurried past on their way. They didn't even pay attention to the girl on the bench. And even if someone had cast a glance at her, they wouldn't have seen the tears. The stranger with the baby in her arms was sitting half-turned, with her back to the main path of the park. Perhaps she didn't want to be seen in such a state. Eleanor Vance realized she definitely couldn't leave now. The girl looked to be in her early 20s, and a baby in her arms. She couldn't just leave her in trouble. The elderly woman hesitated for a long time before speaking to the stranger. It felt awkward to bother people with questions. How would this girl perceive her attention? But Eleanor Vance saw no other way. "Hello," the elderly woman said, sitting down next to the girl on the bench. "Forgive my curiosity, but what happened to you? Can I help you in any way?" The girl turned her tear-stained face towards Eleanor Vance. Surprise was in her burning black eyes. She clearly hadn't expected anyone to show sympathy. "Thank you," the girl replied politely, "but I doubt you can help me with anything. My situation is hopeless." "That's not true. There's always a way out. I'm telling you this from the height of my years. It's not true that there's no way out." Her companion, Eleanor Vance, smiled warmly. "It is. I would tell you, but it's a very long and not very pleasant story. You're probably in a hurry?" "If there's one thing I have plenty of, it's free time," Eleanor Vance replied, "and I absolutely love all kinds of life stories." "What time is it now?" The girl suddenly perked up. Almost 6. The kindergarten is open until 7, so I have another hour. If you have time, then listen. Maria was born in a Roma camp. She and her mother were treated differently from others, dismissively. Maria was punished in completely different ways. The girl always got more. As she grew older, she understood what was going on. Her mother was a stranger here. 70 years ago, a young girl, barely more than a child, ran away with her beloved to the camp. Maria's grandmother, her father's mother, adored her granddaughter despite everything. Maria was the only girl among her grandmother's son's children, long awaited. Finally, the elderly woman would say, "The one has been born to whom I can pass on my gift." Grandmother never hurt Maria. They often talked for long periods, walked together through meadows and steppes, wherever the camp was at that time. Grandmother showed her granddaughter medicinal plants, told her about their power, and often held the girl's hand. During this time, Maria felt a kind of warmth transferring from her grandmother to her. The Roma said that this was how old Esmeralda was passing on her gift to the girl, little by little, despite the priceless gift being received by a stranger. Yes, Maria was called a stranger in the camp, and this was despite the fact that she had lived among these people since birth. It goes without saying that the attitude towards the girl's mother was much cooler. Maria remembered her mother as a silent and indifferent to everything beautiful woman. Her father, having brought her to the camp, quickly grew cold towards his beloved. And the pressure from the people also played a role. He had long since acquired a new wife, who had given him 3 sons one after another. And Maria and her mother lived with grandmother. Esmeralda loved her granddaughter and spent a lot of time with her. But she kept Maria's mother more like a servant, silent. At least, the old woman didn't pity her daughter-in-law. Maria had always, as long as she could remember, felt sorry for her mother. Even as a small child, she understood. Something had broken this beautiful, still very young woman. Some external circumstances had turned her into such a weak-willed, indifferent to everything person. Mother? Even her own daughter didn't concern her. She was always in some world of her own, like an enchanted princess. She performed grandmother's errands like a robot, mechanically. She spoke little, only when necessary. And she never, ever hugged Maria. And she so wanted to feel her mother's embrace, to see tenderness and love in her eyes, or at least interest. Grandmother didn't love Mother, but that feeling wasn't the main one. Esmeralda gave her a roof over her head, food, clothes, and Grandmother tried to heal Mother, to bring her back to a full life. Maria saw this with her own eyes. Esmeralda gave the young woman some concoctions, read incomprehensible spells over her. The girl so hoped it would work. But Mother remained the same, cold, detached, indifferent. "My strength isn't enough to cope with this," Grandmother would sometimes lament. Deep, deep in her soul sits sadness, longing. No one ever loved her. That's terrible, you understand? It cripples the soul. That's why your mother couldn't bear it. "But I love her," Maria would exclaim. That's what gives hope. Perhaps not all is lost yet. And also, Grandmother sees your gift, a little more, and when it fully passes to Maria, it will blossom with new strength. You will be stronger than me, the old woman smiled, stroking her granddaughter's hair. They, all these Roma, who don't accept you now, will fawn over you. They will even beg you to save them or their children from illnesses. Many things can be fixed with different skills using herbs and concoctions. Only use the gift in truly serious cases. It's not a toy. You'll understand when you grow up. And then, one day when Maria was only 11 years old, her mother suddenly fell ill. She was as quiet, emotionless, absent as always. She took to the bed that served her as a bed for a week and didn't get up in the morning. She lay quiet, pale, detached, and breathing very heavily. Grandmother became worried, got out her remedies and old books, and sent Maria outside. The girl sat near the wagon, leaning her back against the wall, and prayed to all powers that Grandmother would manage to pull Mother through. But some inner intuition told her it wouldn't work. And so it happened. Maria sat outside for about 3 hours, and then Grandmother came out to her. From her sad face, the girl immediately understood everything. Mother was no more. Maria took the loss hard. Yes, Mother had never shown any feelings towards her daughter, but still, even her presence gave Maria strength. And most importantly, hope always lived in the girl's heart. Hope that someday everything would be different. Mother would awaken from her stupor. The spell would break. She would smile at her daughter, hug her, and a completely different life would begin. Happy, bright, warm. Grandmother supported her granddaughter as much as she could and tried to understand what the child was feeling now. 2 years passed, and then one morning Esmeralda sat Maria down in front of her, having first warned her that they would have a serious talk. "I had a dream today," Grandmother began. "Not a simple dream. I understood that I will soon be gone." "No, Grandmother," Maria exclaimed. After her mother's death, her most terrible fear was losing her grandmother, because then she would be completely alone. Her father had completely forgotten about her existence, living with his new family. The other Roma also didn't accept Maria. Only Grandmother. Only she in the whole world truly loved Maria. Let Grandmother stop saying such terrible words. "Maria, you must understand. It must be this way. It happens this way. Give me your hand. I will pass on my gift to you completely. I no longer need it." Maria obediently held out her palm to Grandmother. She squeezed it with her dry, thin hand, and the girl felt the familiar warmth seemingly flowing from Grandmother to her. It was a pleasant feeling, but this time, it was scary. Grandmother was never wrong and was certainly telling the truth now too. "How will I be without you?" "I know, dear. You are scared." Grandmother stroked her granddaughter's head. She looked at her with inexpressible sadness. It was clear that Grandmother also didn't want to leave the girl without her support. Without her, Maria was very weak and vulnerable. You were never accepted here. "Listen carefully. When I am gone, leave the camp. Otherwise, they will make you a servant, wear you out with physical labor. Your gift must serve good people. It was given to you to save people. So as soon as I am gone, go. At night. It will be warm, good. You will easily reach the city. Any city that happens to be nearby at that moment. Ask people where the shelter or orphanage is, and go there yourself. Ask to be taken in as a child. They won't refuse. You will be among strangers, but at least you will be warm and fed. You will grow up, become strong." Maria watched her grandmother, looking for signs of illness. But she looked as usual, cheerful, lively, quick. The girl began to think that Grandmother was mistaken, or that the terrible thing that was to happen would not happen soon. But one morning Grandmother didn't get up from her bed as usual. Maria, already knowing what was wrong, slowly approached her loved one and was convinced that Grandmother was no longer here, but somewhere very, very far away. Only her body remained here. The girl sobbed loudly. She cried for a long time, shuddering convulsively and shaking her shoulders. But after that, she felt a little lighter inside. Then Maria sat down right on the floor beside Grandmother's bed and thought deeply, "Grandmother is gone. I must leave. And it's best to do it right now, before any of the adults find out and stop her." Maria understood. They didn't love her here because she was a stranger. Some were even hostile towards her. People were only restrained by Grandmother, who had great authority in the camp. She helped the Roma get rid of toothaches, soothed migraines. Because of this, they tolerated her granddaughter. But now Maria had no protector. It meant it was time to follow grandmother's advice, to run from the camp wherever her eyes led her. Maria knew the city was not far. They had driven past a lovely cozy town the evening before. Maria admired its lights, the distant towers and tall buildings. Not a metropolis, but not a tiny town either. There was definitely a children's shelter there, and more than one, so Maria needed to go there. The girl quickly packed her few belongings into a backpack and, unnoticed by anyone, left the camp. She walked for a long time along a dirt road through wide fields, trudging towards the city. The unknown both frightened and fascinated her. Tears streamed down the girl's cheeks from the abundance of emotions. She didn't even wipe them. No one would see anyway. To herself, Maria seemed tiny, insignificant, weak. But the girl knew. Somewhere inside her sat a strong gift. It wouldn't let her perish. It would help her in a difficult situation. Finally, the girl reached the city, asked people the way to the orphanage, found the institution, opened the door, and asked to be taken to the director. A strict lady in glasses listened to the girl's story attentively. It was a prepared legend, which, however, contained a grain of truth. Maria said she was born and raised in the camp. She didn't specify that she was only half Roma. And then her parents died. The Roma turned the girl into a servant, and another adult widower threatened to marry her. In short, Maria ran away from such a hard life. She chose her own path, a different one. She no longer wanted to live in the camp, but dreamed of studying, getting a profession. It was difficult, but somehow Maria was registered. They made her the necessary documents. The girl took a long time to get used to her new life. Everything was different here. It was confusing. High beds instead of mattress beds, clean ironed bedding, different clothes, different food, a strict daily routine, studying. Maria liked to study. She had a lot to catch up on, so the girl devoted herself. At first, even here, Maria was treated as a stranger. Of course, exotic appearance, unusual story. But it wasn't contempt and alienation, as in the camp. Maria aroused interest. In the first few months of her stay at the orphanage, she had to tell her story several dozen times. She even became a local celebrity. Then life settled into a routine. Maria finished 9 grades, studied to be a merchandiser, celebrated her 18th birthday, and graduated from the orphanage. She received a small apartment from the state as an orphan and got a job. Not in her profession, though. Experience was needed there, and where would a recent college graduate get that? She stood at the checkout in a supermarket. The pay wasn't bad, at least. In short, Maria felt quite happy, and most importantly, normal, not a second-class person, as in the camp. A complete person. She now perceived that past life as some kind of fairy tale. Much of what happened to her back then seemed like fiction, fantasy. For example, that grandmother's gift, which she supposedly passed on to her granddaughter. Time passed, and this superpower didn't manifest itself in any way. So Maria decided that she had imagined it all. It hadn't happened. That's all there was to it. One day, the supermarket where Maria worked was undergoing renovations, and the employees, who were temporarily unable to serve customers, had to supervise the workers in shifts. During one of her shifts, Maria met a handsome young man. Tall, lean, athletic. Light brown hair, light blue eyes, a kind look, an open smile. This young man immediately showed interest in the young cashier, winked at her cheerfully. The girl smiled back, showing that she was not at all against getting acquainted. Young men had approached her before. Maria had an interesting and striking appearance and knew it perfectly well. But things didn't go beyond a couple of dates. These suitors disappointed the girl. But with David, everything turned out completely differently. Somehow, a strong and very warm feeling began to develop between them from the first glance. Maria understood this immediately. They didn't date for long. After a few dates, they decided to live together in Maria's apartment. David was not from the area. He was born in a village in a and he was now working hard on a construction site. He dreamed of a house, not an apartment, and for now he was living in rented accommodation. David immediately took on all the handyman work around the house. He re-glued the wallpaper, fixed the curtain rod that had been crooked for a long time, repaired the wardrobe. And it also turned out he was an excellent cook. In general, it seemed there was nothing David couldn't do. That was his life. He had to learn everything. They were good together, warm, cozy. The young people understood each other with half a word, and sometimes no words were needed at all. At last, Maria felt happy and loved. She hadn't even dreamed of such a relationship. David and Maria got married, and soon after, the young wife realized she was pregnant. The joy of the future parents was boundless. They weren't afraid that their responsibilities would soon increase. Everything was great for them. They had a roof over their heads. They didn't complain about their income, as David earned well at his construction job. Their son Thomas, their firstborn, was born. David chose his name. It was his grandfather's name, a kind and hard-working man. A year and a half later, their daughter Katie appeared in the family. Maria named her after her mother. The chores of caring for the little ones, the household duties, all this delighted and truly captivated Maria. She enjoyed her role as wife and mother. Yes, sometimes it was difficult, but it was all for her loved ones, for her husband, the reliable, caring David, for Tommy and Katie, so sweet and funny. The little ones started kindergarten, and things got a little easier. Maria was getting ready to go back to work. She decided to return from her second maternity leave a little earlier. The couple had ambitious plans. They both dreamed of expanding, turning their one-room apartment into a two-room or even a three-room one. And only then could they think about a house. More space. And besides, it was already getting cramped for such a large family in one room. And then Maria realized she was expecting another child. This time, she was scared. They hadn't planned on becoming a large family so soon, and it wasn't the right time anyway. David was supportive, calmed her down, assured her that everything would be fine. "I'll just work more, that's all. There are plenty of opportunities for side jobs on the construction site." Tragedy struck when Maria was just a month away from giving birth to her youngest daughter. There was very little time left. That morning, she didn't want to let her husband go to work. A vague premonition of trouble gnawed at her. Maria pushed away the bad thoughts, explaining it all by her condition. After all, she was due soon. And 2 hours later, Maria received a call with the terrible news. David had been crushed by a concrete block at the construction site. Of course, they couldn't save him. Maria sobbed, wailed like a wounded animal. Fortunately, the children were at kindergarten, so she could give vent to her feelings. The woman cursed fate, which had once again treated her so cruelly, called David back. And then she somehow suddenly felt his presence. It was inexplicable. She just knew David was there. He saw her, wanted to comfort her, but couldn't, and it hurt him. Maria pulled herself together, said aloud that she loved David very much, realizing that she would never have the opportunity to be heard by him again, and also that she perfectly understood. She now had to be strong, brave for their children's sake. "You can rest assured about us. I'll manage." And Maria tried. She tried very hard to be strong, although sometimes it was simply unbearable. Due to stress, labor started prematurely. The children had to be left with neighbors. Where else could she put them? Originally, The plan was for David to take time off while Maria was in the maternity hospital. But fate had twisted everything this way. The girl was born small, but strong and viable. Maria named her Lily. That's what David had wanted, and the young woman was left with 3 small children in her arms, without any support. Maria applied for all possible benefits, but there still wasn't enough money. The children grew quickly, they constantly needed new clothes and shoes. And also, they were often sick. She had to spend astronomical sums at pharmacies. But what could she do? Health was the most important thing. This is where Maria's gift would have come in handy. If only she could rid her little ones of these endless colds and sore throats. But the gift was dormant. Maybe there was no gift at all. Money was very scarce, and Maria took a step that later seemed like a fatal mistake. She took out a loan. The money, so necessary for the family, was in her hands instantly. Maria bought food, medicine, updated the children's wardrobe. But the amount had to be repaid with high interest. At first, Maria paid the debt regularly. But then the children got sick again. She had to pay a fortune for treatment, and Maria missed a payment. As a result, she was put on the meter. The debt began to grow at a furious rate. This was a common scheme. Maria wasn't the only one caught on this hook. In short, collectors started bothering the young woman. Maria couldn't go back to work. Lily was still too small. She couldn't even leave her for a couple of hours, to clean the stairwell, for example. In short, Maria lost her apartment. It was taken for debts, as the woman had taken the loan precisely against the security of the property. Maria clutched her head. Where could she go with 3 little ones? What had she done? Neighbors advised her to register at a special shelter. You could live there for about 3 months. People were given time to find a job, to get settled in life somehow. But what was Maria to do? Who would hire a woman with 3 children in her arms, one of whom was an infant? And how could she work if she couldn't leave Lily with anyone, and the older ones were constantly getting sick and couldn't attend kindergarten? Well, that's my whole story. A week from now, of course, I haven't been able to find either a job or an apartment. How could I? I have Lily. Where would I put her? And what now? The former teacher gasped. Maria's story was simply incredible, at times even resembling a fairy tale. But this wasn't a movie. This was real life, and the young woman with 3 little ones truly had nowhere to go. How terrible! They'll be taken to a shelter. They'll grow up within institutional walls like I did, only with a living mother who is so insignificant that she can't provide them with normal living conditions. Saying this, Maria started crying again. Quietly, unnoticed. But Eleanor Vance, of course, saw everything and perfectly understood the desperate situation the young woman was in. "Look," the old woman said decisively, "move in with me." It was a strange, risky offer, inviting an unknown family into her home. Eleanor Vance knew her neighbors and acquaintances would judge her. But she didn't care. Maria and her children needed help. If she didn't reach out now, the little ones would go to a shelter and their mother straight to the street. 4 broken lives. Eleanor Vance had nothing left. She was living out her days. And Eleanor Vance would do this, even at risk to herself. What was there to lose? At first, Maria couldn't believe her ears. "And your relatives? They'll be against it, won't they?" "I don't have anyone." Eleanor Vance placed a hand on Maria's shoulder. "Let's go to the kindergarten for your little ones. Then we'll stop by the shop. We need to buy something for dinner. I have guests now." Eleanor Vance grew happier every day about that chance meeting with the young woman in the park. Maria turned out to be a very pleasant and kind person, hardworking, grateful, sensitive. And her children. Eleanor Vance's heart melted with tenderness when she watched them. Serious, thoughtful Thomas, chatty Katie, plump, bright Lily. Eleanor Vance baked them pancakes and pies, feeling like a grandmother. The feeling was so pleasant, words couldn't describe it. Eleanor Vance and Maria often had heart-to-heart talks. They both needed this warmth, care, attention, the absence of a feeling of total loneliness and uselessness. Complete strangers in just a few weeks. So she had to tell Maria about her diagnosis. If only I had that gift. She shook her head bitterly. Time passed. Eleanor Vance's condition worsened. It was inevitable, and the doctors had warned her right away. That's how it happens. It was time to move to the hospice, under the care of medical staff. Maria saw Eleanor Vance off with tears in her eyes. All in the ambulance. Although the elderly woman had tried to dissuade her from this troublesome step. After all, she would have to go back home with tiny Lily in her arms. Eleanor Vance had taken care of Maria beforehand. She had left her the apartment. The neighbors, of course, gossiped. She'll kill you, instead of just getting her hands on the apartment quickly. She'll poison you or come up with something else. But Eleanor Vance was confident in Maria. You couldn't fake that. The elderly woman was a good judge of people. Maria was truly attached to her and was very afraid of losing her. Maria herself had said this many times and even cried. What is this? Why do all my loved ones leave? Why am I always left alone in the end? Maria, upon learning of Eleanor Vance's terrible diagnosis, broke down and sobbed, quite sincerely. Eleanor Vance comforted her, promised that everything would be all right. Maria later apologized to her for her weakness. The hospice was quiet, peaceful, cozy, friendly doctors, high doses of medication to manage pain and attacks. Eleanor Vance spent her time half asleep. Her head felt clear, her soul peaceful. Maria often visited her, placed her palm on her forehead, looked at her attentively, directly in the eyes. After she left, Eleanor Vance felt better, more cheerful. Somehow strength appeared. Probably from the feeling that someone needed her, someone cared about her, worried about her. Several weeks passed. To her surprise, Eleanor Vance felt better. She even had the strength to take walks in the hospital garden. Again, she admired the flowers, the bright blue sky, enjoying this parting gift from fate to the fullest. She might not have another such improvement in her condition. Her test results, strangely enough, also improved. The doctors were surprised, but said that this sometimes happened. A calm before the storm. Eleanor Vance suddenly felt a strong desire to visit home one more time, to see Maria and her little ones, to breathe in the familiar scent of her apartment, to take something from there as a keepsake. The locket, the one Kathy had given her many years ago, a memorable item with a history. It would be good to have it with her here, in the hospice, as a reminder of home, of her past life. Eleanor Vance asked the doctor for permission. He gave her the go-ahead for a trip home. Eleanor Vance called a taxi and left. It was so amazing. She hadn't thought she would ever leave the hospice walls alive. This wasn't recovery, of course, not a cure for the disease. But to feel no pain, to be able to go wherever her heart desired. She felt strength in her legs and arms, and a pleasant lightness throughout her body. Eleanor Vance opened the door with her key. The apartment was quiet and empty. It was clear. Maria was out with Lily for a walk. The little ones were at kindergarten. Eleanor Vance walked through the familiar rooms, touched her favorite things. The rocking chair, the plush bear George had once won for her at a shooting gallery, the soft blanket. Here was the bedside table with the drawer where her jewelry was kept. Eleanor Vance wasn't interested in expensive chains and rings. She came for that very locket. The elderly woman found the item she was looking for, opened the locket, and admired Kathy's cheerful face. Where is she now? Then she heard a sound. Eleanor Vance hurried to meet her. You're home, Maria gasped. She sat Lily down and approached Eleanor Vance. Joy and surprise were in Maria's eyes. Yes, well, I felt better. They let me come home for a little while. Better? Maria smiled. Really? Did it really work? What worked? Eleanor Vance didn't understand. It's all my gift, you see. I was worried about you. I didn't want to lose another loved one. I've already had so many losses in my life. I even cried when the children didn't see me. And one day I had a dream. My grandmother, Esmeralda the Roma woman, she sternly told me that I must stop crying, that now was the time to use my gift. Yes, grandmother said it would be difficult, and it cost her a lot of effort. And it would all be in vain if I didn't pull you through. And I did it. I awakened the power within me. I think grandmother helped too. Eleanor Vance blinked in confusion. Well, Can this be true? And then she remembered how light she felt every time after Maria's visits, how warm her hands were. Not just warm. Eleanor Vance had thought at the time that she was just imagining it because of her illness. What do the doctors say? Maria seemed not to fully believe this miracle herself. Well, they said my tests improved, but it might just be the calm before the storm. There won't be any storm. Maria smiled broadly and then hugged Eleanor Vance tightly. The storm is canceled. My gift has awakened. It awakened so I could save you, you see? You don't believe me? You'll see. Everything will be fine. Now Maria clasped her hands together from the overflow of emotions. Her coal-black eyes shone with joy. Little Lily didn't understand anything, but she sensed that something good was happening, and she smiled too, just like her mother. Oh, what's that in your hand? Maria finally noticed the locket. What an interesting thing. I feel it has some special energy. Warm, good. This is a gift from one of my students. A former one, of course. It was a long time ago. Eleanor Vance still couldn't process what Maria had said. Does this mean the end is postponed? That she'll live longer? And now she wanted to live especially. And there were the little ones who loved her so much and needed her so much. She wanted to see them grow up, mature. She wanted to support them on their difficult life path. Life is so complicated. People need help, support, understanding, love. Meanwhile, Maria was turning the locket in her hands. Something about it had really caught her attention. Finally, she used her fingernail to pry open the lid. A gasp of surprise escaped her. Maria covered her mouth with her hand. It's my mother, the woman finally said, pointing at Kathy's photo. She's younger here, but it's definitely her. I recognize her. It can't be. Eleanor Vance hadn't recovered from one shock when another hit her. It just doesn't happen like that. It does, apparently. It's definitely Mom. Her eyes, her lips, her nose. I remember her face in the smallest detail. What was your mother's name? Kathy. I named my eldest daughter after her. Of course. How did I not realize it right away? And my student's name was Kathy. She disappeared when she was a teenager. I didn't help her. I didn't understand in time. She ran away to a Roma camp with a Roma man, and then she gave birth to you. Incredible. I couldn't help Kathy, but I helped her daughter. And you. You, in turn, saved me. All this still needed to be processed. But at that very moment, Eleanor Vance somehow became completely convinced that the illness had retreated and that she now had a life.